established rich coming right back at you. Sometimes a controversy doesn't start with a fight. Sometimes it starts with a sentence. One sentence and one name. One moment where somebody decides to say something that never should have been made public. And all of a sudden, the whole internet is talking. That's exactly what just happened with Michael Eric Dyson, a respected scholar, a best-selling author, a man who has spent decades talking about hip-hop, black culture, and politics. But this time, the story ain't about his ideas. It's about his judgment. Because during a recent conversation, while he was defending Drake in the middle of a culture war that started after Kendrick dropped Not Like Us, Dyson said something that made many people stop even listening to the argument and start focusing on the name he brought into it. The name was JayZ. Now let's be clear about something. JayZ ain't just a rapper. JayZ is one of the most private people in hip-hop. A man who has been famous for more than 3 decades. A man who has built billion-dollar businesses. A man who moves with extreme discipline about what he says and what he don't say. And one thing people who know him well will tell you is, when JayZ speaks to you privately, it's supposed to stay private. But during that conversation, Michael Eric Dyson decided to share something. He said JayZ hit him up. He said JayZ reached out to disagree with him about his point of view on the whole Not Like Us situation. And Dyson presented it as a moment where he stood on business. Like this was a story about intellectual courage. Like he was telling the world, even if a hip-hop billionaire calls me, I'm still gonna stand on business. But the moment he said JayZ's name, the whole story changed. Because the internet didn't hear a brave story. They heard something else. The internet heard a private conversation being put on display. And in hip-hop, that's a very different thing. Because hip-hop has rules, unwritten rules. Rules about respect, rules about trust, rules about what happens when somebody speaks to you in confidence. And one of those rules is very simple. Private conversations stay private. The moment that clip started circulating, people started saying the same thing. Why would you say that? Why you put JayZ name in it? Why would you take a private moment and turn it into a public story? And just like that, the argument about Drake, the argument about Kendrick, the argument about blackness, all of that got pushed to the side. Now the story was about trust. Now it was about whether or not Michael Eric Dyson broke a rule in hip-hop that everybody understands. And when the backlash started coming in, it came fast because a lot of people know how JayZ move. This is a man who rarely does interviews, rarely responds to drama, rarely even speaks publicly about controversies. So when his name started trending in a story he didn't authorize, people knew something was off. And that's when Michael Eric Dyson did something very interesting. He apologized.
People think, well, it ain't that serious, and that's not what's going on. My job as a scholar is to show you that stuff you didn't think was that serious might be a bit more serious than you think. I could be wrong, to be sure. So I don't say it with the kind of arrogance that some of my interlocutors on the internet have suggested. And let me tell you something. A very dear and good friend of mine disagrees with me bitterly. Well, I won't say bitterly, just aggressively and vigorously. His name is Sean Carter, better known as JayZ. Now, I don't usually talk about the conversations that JayZ and I have because that's between us. That's why we remain friends, because I ain't out here blabbing about what we talk about. But he hit me up and he vigorously disagreed with my particular position. He said it with dignity. He said it with respect. He articulated his ideal intelligently. I responded to him. We went back and forth for a minute, and I shared with him my essay, the 3,000 some word essay I wrote in the Philadelphia paper, where I break down what's going on between Kendrick and Drake. And he was respectful. What I love about Jay is that he's not arrogant, and he's got more reason to be arrogant than anybody we talking to, including myself, on this darn internet. And yet in social media.
A few moments later.
I remember once when Kanye posted publicly a text exchange between us that was private, and I was hurt by that. And I'm thinking about that because I've done the same thing to JayZ. No, I didn't publicly post a text, but I talked about a private exchange between us that should have remained between us as it has for the last 20 some odd years. So I want to apologize to him here. Why am I doing it here and not to him directly? Because the old black people said, where you did it is where you get it. Where you messed up is where you fess up. And that's what I'm doing. What was his main disagreement? Look, first of all, it wasn't a call. It was a text. That's what we do. We text about geopolitics. We text about The Godfather and a myriad of topics. That is what our habit is. His main disagreement, when I compared Kendrick in his line, Not Like Us, to Trump in his trying to distinguish himself from others who weren't on the same level. And JayZ said basically that was a faulty kind of comparison. One is a rapper, the other is a far more sinister force. And he said, this is what rappers do. They look at the vulnerabilities of and insecurities of their opponent and they exploit them. Why would he know that? Because he conducted one of the most famous rap battles in the history of the art form. And so I mischaracterized him. He said, it ain't that serious. He wasn't vigorously disagreeing with me. It's not like he called me and said that. And even on the text, he literally said, it's not that serious. So I want to apologize to him. And the reason I clarified my position in the first place is because he made that distinction between Trump and Kendrick that I wanted to make clear that I completely understood and did not intend. So God bless you all on this morning. Rest in peace, Reverend Jesse Jackson. JayZ, my sincerest apologies. Much love to you, my dear brother.
Now, after watching that, you can tell something very important. The energy is different. The tone is different. This is no longer a man trying to win an argument. This is a man trying to fix a mistake. But the truth is, sometimes people don't realize they crossed the line until the reaction comes back. People started asking a very simple question. Did Michael Eric Dyson just damage his relationship with one of the most powerful men in hip-hop? Because when trust is broken, sometimes an apology is not enough. And that's what makes this story so interesting. This ain't about Drake or Kendrick. This is about something bigger. It's about what happens when intellectuals start playing the same game as rappers. It's about what happens when somebody wants to sound smart for the room, but forgets that every word has consequences. And most importantly, it's about a very old lesson that a lot of us learn the hard way. Just because you can say something, don't mean you should. Because some doors in life only close one time. And when they close, they don't always open again. Let's keep it real. This whole situation didn't become a story just because of Drake. It ain't even become a story because of Kendrick. It became a story because of trust. Because the moment you bring somebody's private words into a public conversation, you changing the game. And that's what a lot of people felt happened when Michael Eric Dyson brought JayZ into the conversation. See, in Dyson's mind, this was probably a moment of intellectual flexing. A moment where he could show the room that he was having real powerful conversations with real powerful people. A moment where he could say, even JayZ disagreed with me and I stood on business. But the internet didn't hear that as courage. They heard it as something different. The internet heard somebody name dropping a private conversation. And in hip hop, that's a dangerous move because hip hop is built on something that don't get talked about enough. Trust. Trust between artists. Trust between friends. Trust between people who speak to each other off the record. When that trust gets broken, people start moving different. That's why this story hit a nerve. Because people know how JayZ operates. This is a man who has been at the top of the game for 30 years. 30 years of business, 30 years of deals, 30 years of relationships. And you don't stay in that position unless you're extremely careful about who you talk to. So when a private conversation ends up on a public podcast, people start connecting dots. They start asking questions. Did JayZ expect that to be private? Did Dyson think it was okay to share? Or was this just a moment where somebody wanted to sound important in the room? Because let's keep it real. The moment Dyson said JayZ's name, the whole conversation changed. It wasn't about Not Like Us. All of that got lost. It was about how JayZ felt now. People were asking, why did you say that? And that's a hard question for him to answer. Because in academic spaces, people are used to debate. They are used to bringing up examples. But hip-hop don't work like a classroom. Hip-hop got its own rules, its own way of handling disagreements. And one of the biggest rules is simple. Don't put nobody on blast, especially when that person didn't ask to be part of your story. That's why this moment landed so heavy. Because it looked like Dyson was trying to win an argument by borrowing somebody else's name. And when you do that, you put that person in a position they never asked to be in. Now, JayZ is part of the public debate. All because somebody decided to mention a private phone call. And that's where this story gets even more complicated. Because the apology came quickly, very quickly. The moment the internet started talking, he said he made a mistake and that he should have kept it private. But here's the real question. Is an apology enough? Because apologies fix a lot of things, but they don't always fix trust. And trust is one of the hardest things to rebuild, especially when you're dealing with somebody as quiet as JayZ. People always talk about JayZ as a businessman, the billionaire, the mogul. But what they don't talk about enough is his discipline. The discipline to stay out of the drama, the discipline to say less, the discipline to keep private conversations private. And that discipline is a big part of why he's been able to stay in power for so long. So when somebody breaks that type of code, it don't just create an awkward moment. It creates a question that only time can answer. Will JayZ ever look at that relationship the same again? Because history has shown something about JayZ. When trust gets broken, he don't always argue, he don't always respond. Sometimes he just moves different. And when a person like JayZ starts moving different, you might not even know the door closed until you realize you no longer invited in the room. Listen, the real story is about how people move when they trusted with private information. Because in life, everybody wants access. People want access to power, access to success, access to important people, but access comes with responsibility. When somebody calls you privately, that's not a public moment. That's not a story. That's trust. And that's where a lot of people think Michael Eric Dyson made his biggest mistake. See, in his mind, he was probably defending his idea. An idea about hip-hop, an idea about culture, an idea about what he believes people should think about Drake. But when he decided to say that JayZ called him, the focus stopped being about the idea. Now the story was about the relationship, because everybody knows something about JayZ. He don't talk much. He don't comment on every debate. You ain't never seen him on a podcast. When JayZ speaks to you directly, it's usually because he chose to. And when somebody chooses to speak to you privately, that moment is supposed to stay between you and them. That's not just hip-hop culture. That's human culture. That's friendship. That's professional respect. Listen, whether you agree with Dyson or not, the argument is not what bothered people. It was the method. It was the moment he decided to use JayZ's name to support his position. Now JayZ's name is in the headlines. And that's a whole different thing. See, a lot of people think the biggest mistakes in life are the loud ones, the fights, the arguments, the drama. But sometimes the biggest mistake is a quiet one. One sentence, one name, one moment where you said something that should have stayed unsaid. And by the time you realize it, the moment has already traveled around the world. That's the reality of the internet. Once the story is out, you can't put it back. This is a lesson that everybody eventually learns in real life. Just because somebody trusts you with information, don't mean you should use it. Just because you can use it to win an argument, don't mean it's worth the cost. Because relationships are hard to build and very easy to damage. And the truth is, some relationships can never go back to the way they were. Not because people hate each other, but because trust has changed. See, JayZ been around long enough to understand something. Everybody can't be in every room. Everybody can't be a part of every conversation. And sometimes, the way you find that out is very simple. You watch what people do with your words. And if your words end up somewhere they were never supposed to be, you start moving differently. And that might be the real story here. The real story is whether or not this moment changed the relationship. Because in life, access is privilege. Trust is a privilege. And when you lose those two things, they don't always come back. But hey, that's just my opinion. What's yours? Like, comment, subscribe, establish rich. I'll be back with another one. Peace.